And there's been a great deal of discussion in the scientific community outside of China over whether bats were the vector for this. Pangolins have been mentioned as an animal that might have been involved. And then there are some scientists that are very firmly saying, no, it couldn't have been zoonotic. It doesn't work that way. It couldn't have worked that way. So, I mean, people that are serious and I think not really political have strongly disagreed about where this came from.
Yes, and this is why the fact that the Chinese have been stonewalling is such a problem, because, it does seem to have started in China from whatever source. If we never have a chance to take a look at the records, at hopefully examining the records of patient zero or the person who is said to be patient zero, we're missing a huge amount of the information needed to come up with a solution.
Well, there's an interesting story that came out in the last couple of days that the French medical community believes it has isolated an early patient in France who had the coronavirus all the way back in December 27th is the date when they believe he might have been infected, which is much earlier than anyone was believed to have had it outside of China, and pretty early even on the scale of the Wuhan virus outbreak. If that's true, what does that tell us about this situation? I know the Chinese are likely to say, that proves it didn't come from us because this French guy had it in December.
Well, until we know some more history about this French case, for example, where did this person come from? Where did this person go? Had they visited China? Had they had family, for example, that visited China? There's a lot of different odd cases from the end of 2019 about things that look like pneumonia but didn't test for pneumonia. So all sorts of possibilities emerge. And again, without more data, we're all speculating. What this should reinforce is that we're operating in the dark, and one of the biggest potential flashlights, one of the biggest potential sources of information has chosen not to cooperate.
I thought one of the biggest underreported stories of the past week was the World Health Organization admitting that they're not allowed to investigate the coronavirus. The Chinese will not invite them, as they put it, to participate in their inspection. Supposedly they're digging into finding out where this came from, and the World Health Organization said we were not invited despite repeated requests to participate in that. That should be a global outrage, shouldn't it? Especially with the World Health Organization being so much under the microscope right now for China's influence on it, for its performance during the pandemic, for the WHO to say, oh, by the way, they're not even letting us investigate where the virus came from, and we're not really that upset about it, seems like a bit of a bombshell, isn't it?
Absolutely. It should be a bombshell. It should be something that should get a lot more coverage. Something tells me, however, that various other press outlets would much rather spend time figuring out, whether Donald Trump stood 2 inches closer or farther away from Anthony Fauci and what that might mean, than investigating how the WHO is being prevented from helping to solve the pandemic. Unfortunately, the WHO itself, some of their leading doctors ended interviews because the interviewer raised the mention of Taiwan. So that raises real questions about what the senior leadership at WHO is outraged about. Maybe it's not about being led into China.
That's an interesting little scandal, as a side scandal, because China has taken a baseball bat to the knees of Canada, of all people, because the Chinese are furious that the Canadian Parliament wants to talk to that WHO official, Bruce Aylward, who happens to be Canadian. The Canadian Parliament wants him to come testify. He refuses to do it, so they subpoenaed him, and the Chinese just went nuts when that happened and started screaming curses at Canada in their state media.
Well, everyone else likes Canada, but the Chinese lately have been demonstrating that they really don't like Canada. They've arrested former diplomats who were working in Canada, in part because Canada has cooperated with the U.S. on investigating the chief financial officer for Huawei. But they've also apparently been screaming at the Dutch because the Dutch renamed their mission to Taiwan in a way that China doesn't approve of. China is acting in many ways like the old imperial days. We will tell you what to think. We will tell you how you should talk about us. And if you refuse, it's your fault for not behaving like a quote-unquote friend of China.
And they don't really seem like they're trying to win a lot of friends right now. It seems like all of their reactions are so belligerent. They went through a brief period where they tried to pose as the saviors of humanity and the great coronavirus fighters and will help you and send you supplies. And now everything they say is bitter and angry and vindictive as they're yelling at whoever has annoyed them next by calling for an investigation. Is that a global movement gaining strength? Are they right to be afraid that the world is starting to coalesce around demanding more information about this virus than they are willing to provide ever?
Well, I think we need to recognize that the Chinese are using a lot of different tools. So they still have state-owned enterprises. One example is China Communications Construction Corporation, CCCC. If you go to their Facebook page, no mention that they're a state-owned enterprise. Lots of mention of all of the masks and gowns that they have been donating to countries where CCCC has operations, whether it's Malaysia or Uganda. So while their diplomats are, screaming at the top of their lungs at countries like Canada and the United States and Australia, they're also quietly moving in the background to make sure that as many other countries as possible either are in debt or at least recognize that this is a fight you want to just stay quiet on. So when American or Australian diplomats come knocking, you'll turn them away.
Australia is another interesting case. That Australia's relationship with China was a bit rocky before the pandemic, was getting a little frayed, and now it's really frayed after the pandemic, and it's become quite heated between the two of them. And one of the interesting side effects of the last few weeks of events in Australia is this sense among some of Australia's pro-China business community that they really can't afford to push all that hard, that they might want to have explanations, that they might be angry at the Chinese for their role in spreading the pandemic, and they might be suspicious that they did some sinister things, but at the end of the day, they're not in a position to have a big fight with China. They need to trade with them too much. The Australian economy depends on China too much, so pretty much literally, they've been telling some of their citizens to just, sit back and enjoy your jobs and don't pick a fight with Beijing that you're going to lose.
This is one of the reasons why the Chinese are a much tougher opponent than the old Soviet Union. The Soviet Union didn't trade with anyone, and one of the consequences of that is you have no interest groups in the other countries that see good relations with you as being financially beneficial and politically desirable. China, is the largest or second largest trading partner of almost every country on the planet, essentially has a interest group lobby in every country that's going to say exactly what you just said. Hey, let's not push them too hard. Hey, let's not come down too hard, because it's a matter of jobs. It's a matter of business. It's a matter of keeping supplies flowing to our factories or keeping markets open for our products. And the Chinese are more than happy to capitalize on that.
Is our intelligence gathering capability in China in bad shape? One heard stories towards the end of President Obama's term that we had suffered quite a few reversals in our ability to conduct human intelligence operations in China, that they had rolled up some of our spy networks, possibly as a result of the big hack of the Government Accountability Organization. Are we really able to get good intel out of China? Do we have a chance of solving the riddle of the coronavirus without their help through spycraft?
Well, obviously, this is the kind of thing that is going to be very hard to divine, because all of this is top secret. But even the New York Times reported that the Chinese, interestingly, and the Iranians, apparently rolled up our spy networks because they penetrated the communications channels. Satellites and things can do a lot in terms of seeing big things, building an aircraft carrier, moving an armored division. This coronavirus and where it came from, this is the kind of thing that you really need people listening, people talking, people just overhearing conversations at the coffee shop or in the marketplace or what have you. So, obviously I don't know what the state of our spy networks might be, but if these stories are correct, we're probably operating at a lot less capability than would be desirable.